right. Well, I guess I've got it back. Back sort of. Look, I want to welcome you to listening to another strange version of Let's Talk with John Kane. I'm not in New York City, and I am not on WBAI, as far as I know. I'm back in my own studio, back in Seneca territory. But look, I want to reach out. I want to stay in contact with those of you who at least have been listening to this show via Facebook Live, and as we put it up as a podcast and put it up on our YouTube channel, that you know that I'm still trying to maintain something here, and that frankly that I still plan to do something in New York City. I want to spend this show, and I don't want to spend every show doing this, but I do want to spend a good portion of the show kind of explaining what the status of things are at WBAI, what the prospects for the future are. I'm not going to get into the details of legal cases and that kind of stuff. I mean, some of that stuff's going to play out, and until there's some final disposition in the courts, everything else is just speculation and interpretation of processes that are at best hard to understand, and at worst convoluted, I guess. So again, I'm John Kane, and this is the show that I'm normally doing on Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. on the air on WBAI 99.5 on the FM dial in New York City. But for now, I'm only streaming live on Facebook. And this show, I will take the audio of the show and put it up on my SoundCloud account, put it up as a podcast, and I will take this video and put it up as a YouTube video. I'm not even going to do a full hour today. I just wanted to basically reach out and touch base to those of you who I know last week were wondering, geez, are you going to do a show this week? Well, I'm going to do the one this week, and I'm going to try to sort out while we're in this transition, and whatever this transition is to whatever WBAI is going to become, and whether somebody like me is going to be invited to be a part of whatever WBAI's future is, regardless of who ends up maintaining control of the station. I'm still going to try to work something out, whether I continue to do something from my own studio here on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, or whether I make some sort of alliance or collaboration with another media source in the New York City area, or at least east of the Buffalo market, I guess. So, all right, if you don't know, if you're turning on 99.5 on the FM dial in New York City, or trying to listen online, you are listening to, I think, what they're calling Pacifica Across America, and it's not WBAI produced programs. Now, there are some programs that have been on WBAI that are airing on this on the WBAI network, but that's being piped in from the folks in California, and those are shows that have basically been offered up to Pacifica, and some of them I think some of them are actually expanded shows now that there is no WBAI produced programming on WBAI. It is it's producers that have some other facility or access to some other facility who can record a show and then make it available to Pacifica. Now, for those of you who may recall, when the shutdown happened in the first week of October 7th, and the plug got pulled, and then a certain element of the Pacifica board, or certainly the interim executive director, pulled the plug, disconnected the studio on 388 Atlantic Avenue in Buffalo, in Brooklyn, to the transmitter at One Times Square. They began piping in audio from a California station, or from California. So that's when all WBAI programming stopped. But the funny thing happened. I mean, I made it clear once they pulled the plug, because essentially by pulling the plug, they pulled the plug on me, that I was going to do a show that Thursday anyway. I did, and lo and behold, they aired that show. Nobody told me that I offered no permission. I had no conversation. In fact, it wasn't my audio was not served up to Pacifica or to WBAI. It was just posted up on my own personal SoundCloud account and posted up as my podcast. And the powers that be who were controlling what was going over the air took that audio and put it up on WBAI's airwaves. And they actually ran it, I think, 4 times altogether, from what I understand. Now, I say this for a couple of reasons, because now there is a conversation about those programs that have previously been airing on WBAI still airing, and there's a lot of conversation about whether they are essentially scabs. They are, folks who are supporting the takeover, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case, and so I'm not necessarily going to condemn producers who are producing a show and through somebody else's decision, those shows are still airing. But again, I got to be clear: there is no programming happening at the WBAI studios, and of course that's one of the reasons they were able to put my show on the air, because I have my own studio, so I was able to produce a program, put it up, and make it available for people to listen to. I didn't know I was making it available for some of the powers that be at Pacifica to air it, but I'm not crazy about having been used that way, because it does send a signal like somehow that I had made some sort of arrangement, or that that I was supporting the takeover. And I want to be clear on some of that. As look, that show that I did that aired those 4 times, I had Reggie Johnson from who's one of the operations personnel and one of the producers, and a guy who basically is the studio engineer when I'm doing my show in New York. He joined me, and we had some pretty candid conversations, and I want to expand a little bit of those conversations, because there's no question that WBAI has been in peril. And some of the decisions that have been made at WBAI and for WBAI go beyond, and they've had effects that certainly us producers have no control over. So to say that WBAI should just be returned to the air the way it was prior to October 7th, that doesn't really solve some of the bigger and underlying problems. And honestly, as I sit here today, although there are still plenty of legal wrangling going on, there's I think next week there's a hearing that some people hope will be the final decision. I guess if you win that, I guess you hope it's the final decision. If you end up on the short end, you probably hope there are other recourses. But I don't anticipate that WBAI is ever going to turn back to what it was, and for a variety of reasons, and some legitimate reasons. Here is the biggest issue that I had with what took place on October 7th. And there's several, but the biggest issue that I have is the notion that a group from the Pacifica board, which didn't have the authorization from a vote or the majority of the Pacifica board, which included the executive director, the interim executive director, John Vernile, they came into the studio, immediately fired everybody except for one person, began installing locks on the doors, dismantling pieces of equipment, removing certain pieces of equipment, and then notifying Melissa Ennin, who owns the Brooklyn Commons, which is the building that WBAI occupies the 3rd floor of, told her that her space was no longer needed and that she could look for another tenant. Now, whatever else anybody wanted to do about management or programming or even staffing, that could have been viewed as, oh, look, we're going to change things, we're going to fix things. But when you say, no, we're going to eliminate our ability in New York City to do programming, we're going to eliminate studio, our own studio, we're going to start gutting some of the equipment, that's not coming from a place that says they're going to repair WBAI. That's coming from a place of saying, no, we're going to end WBAI, not just as we know it, but we're going to end WBAI as a New York City, a New York produced show. Now, the plan to do this Pacific Across America thing it did, in all likelihood, did involve hoping they could pull in, some of the folks who had other resources to produce shows, but essentially eliminate an actual studio for WBAI to produce programming. So again, no news staff, no locally produced shows, and that's what I had problems with. Look, I don't know who. I mean, look, I was even on the local station board for a year, and I still don't understand fully how the governance structure is supposed to work. I know how it didn't work. And there was no management evaluation that was being done at the time. It was mired in some of the factionalism that existed within the station. So I'm going to talk candidly here, speak candidly about the way I saw it, both as a producer, as a local station board member, and as somebody who tried to navigate all of the divisiveness that predated my coming to WBAI. And let's be clear, I've been there for a while. I started filling in for Tiokasin Ghost Horse when he needed a guest host. I did First Voices for an entire year while Tiokasin was gone, and I've been doing a talkback show for. I'm in the 5th year doing a talkback show. So I didn't just show up. I mean, I did shows from Wall Street. 120 Wall Street. I did shows up at City College up in Harlem, and I've done shows, of course, now from what they built up with what they had to work with, a studio in Brooklyn. So I would understand that if there was some changes, and frankly, if my show was cut because in somebody's infinite wisdom, my show doesn't make the programming standards cut. So be it. I would still be in the same situation that I'm in right now. I'd be looking for a way to continue to do a New York show. Now, one of the problems is with me trying to do a show from here that I simply just claim as a New York show is that I'm not in New York City. I probably couldn't be farther away from New York City and still be in without going beyond the New York State borders. I'm doing this show and streaming this show live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, which is about 30 miles south of Buffalo. Not far off of the Interstate 90 as it heads west and then turns south before going along the bottom of the Great Lakes. So for those of you who are not familiar with the geography, I want to throw some of that out there. So for me to do a show in New York, I would take an 8.5-hour train ride to New York to do what at one time was a 2-hour show, but that got reduced to a 1-hour show. That actually is one of the issues that I had with management. But anyway, that's how I was doing a show. Now, for me to do a show back here, it loses not only the fact that I'm not doing a show in New York City, but it actually starts to cut away at the threads that connect me to New York City, the things that I do in terms of events, being able to spend a day or two a week in New York City. If I'm only doing a show for back here, I don't get any of that New York City vibe. And doing a talkback show is difficult. Without having a place where I can receive phone calls and having a phone system, which hasn't always been the case even at WBAI, I certainly don't have that capability here. So for me to do a New York City show and a live talkback show, I pretty much need to be in New York City once a week to do the show. And doing something from back here is just going to be recording a show and perhaps serving it up, I guess, which really isn't what I had in mind. I do that already. I do a show called Let's Talk Native, and I do that show normally on Tuesdays and Saturdays. This week I'll be doing it on Sunday because of the Native American Music Awards. But I do a show twice a week already called Let's Talk Native, and again it is more specifically geared towards Native issues. The show that I do in New York, while I tackle Native issues, I also try to provide a Native perspective to the issues that affect us all. Now, that's kind of a unique animal, and that doesn't exist anywhere else. I mean, if a Native person makes it into broadcasting and they're asked to do a job, they often they may be Native to look at, but they're not usually bringing a Native perspective unless they're hosting their own show and they're bringing native content, native perspective to the show. That's not, even when we've had some people who've been able to make it in the industry, that's not really been the case. This was the exception. So not only was I able to bring a native perspective, but I was able to share that native perspective and offer a native perspective from a person who lives on a native territory, travels to a major media market like New York City, and then weigh in on issues of New York City, issues of New York State, issues of the region, United States and Canadian issues, and of course, native issues. That's what we had, and that's what I'm hoping to continue to do. Not sure how I'm going to do that yet. Part of this is going to be waiting out to see what happens in the courts. Now, to be clear, it may not just be a court issue, because there is governance within the Pacifica board, the Pacifica National Board, and currently the majority of the board members do not support what people are calling the coup, the shutdown of WBAI local programming. Now, the majority of that board still sees WBAI as problematic. So there are going to be some solutions. I don't think that we're ever going to see WBAI the way it was the days before October 7th. And I'm not sure that we should. But where my show and some of the shows that many of the WBAI listeners have come to love, where they're going to fall after this, I really don't know. So in the meantime, I am still, making conversations with various other media platforms and media outlets to see if there's a way that I can get back on the air, at least in the Albany area, if not in the New York City area, so I can have a direct live contact with that, again with the people of those markets. So, and of course beyond, because of the internet. I'm not going to get in and explain, as I have in the past, all the things that I think need to happen at WBAI. We know that something's got to change. Pulling the plug was certainly not the answer. So I did want to address that. I am going to try to do a show, at least a half-hour show once a week on my normal in my normal time slot. This 4 to 5. I may change that time slot as we go forward, but I still want to do a Let's Talk with John Kane show. I may have to rely on just plugging a few callers in, maybe a guest or two via the one phone line that I have. But I don't have the staffing or the phone system to do to open up a bank of phones, to listeners or to callers. So until I have a place that I can do that at, this show will not be the same show that many of you have grown accustomed to. Now, I will say I was in New York a couple of weeks ago. Did an event at Verso Books in Bumbo over by the waterfront in Brooklyn, and some folks came out to from listeners from WBAI. Even some board members came out, and it was a good event. But I came early enough that I could hang around WBAI for the day, and I did. And there were meetings going on that I certainly was not necessarily a part of, but I did get a chance to catch up with my good friends like Michael G. Haskins and Reggie Johnson and others. And there were some interesting conversations that played out there. One of the things that happened was somebody who really, and I'm not going to get into a bunch of names, but pretty much people who know the station. Somebody who really puts a big emphasis on Arbitron or Nielsen numbers. Pulled out the list and wanted to see how my numbers were. And turns out, my numbers for a Thursday, 4 to 5 were not bad for WBAI. I mean, it's not 10,000 listeners, but it's not 1,000 listeners. It was, I came in the 3 to 3,700 listeners per hour, which it obviously should be much more than that for the New York City market. But for what WBAI is performing at, I was relatively towards I was kind of towards the top end of that. Now, having said that, I don't put a whole lot of stock in those numbers or the accuracy of those numbers, whether they are favorable to me or unfavorable to me. So I don't want to dwell on it. But I just thought it was kind of worth mentioning, because that is one of the things that there's been a strong emphasis on. So that was a couple of weeks ago. Now I got to talk just earlier this week. I was kind of a last minute addition to something that some of you folks are aware of, are familiar with, the Poor People's Campaign. They were holding a conference in Corning, New York, and myself and my good friend Ross John, who was Seneca and sits on council and who I've worked with for many years, we took the ride out and participated in the Poor People's Campaign in Corning, New York, and I was pleased to see a bunch of WBAI listeners there who had made the trip up, not only from Long Island, but from the city, including Gerald. I mean, it was great to catch up with some people. A bit of a surprise because it was such a last-minute decision to go, I hadn't anticipated running into people that I would know. And so it was a great opportunity to catch up with people. Heard much of the sentiment that so many of us heard. Look, we want you back on the air. We want you this. We want you that. And again, I expressed my desire to continue with some of that. Now, one of the things that with meeting some of these folks, we talked about doing some events together, and again, trying to fulfill more of my commitment to come to New York, do events, speaking events, not just producing events, but participating in events, including some of the events that may or may not be directly associated to the Poor People's Campaign. And there was an invitation to possibly come to the Riverside Church in Manhattan. And look, this is the kind of thing that I want to continue to do. There are a lot of issues that I am fairly well versed at. Not the least of which are social justice issues, climate issues, environmental issues, political issues, and so there's any number of things that I can, and for those of you who listen to the show, know that I have if not an exclusively unique perspective on, but a perspective that probably isn't widely held, perhaps not even widely held amongst Native people. But it is a perspective that comes from being Native, living on Native territory, having Native. My wife is Native, my kids are Native, my grandkids are Native. So this is part of what my identity is. Now, that's not to say that there aren't plenty of Native people who for a variety of reasons, have adopted very, very familiar positions on issues relating to the politics and governance and religion, all those things. But I do come at things from a little bit different perspective, and I think that's what makes my show different. So. But I do plan to continue to try to make trips to New York City to do events. Look, I want to continue to promote Native artists in terms of musical artists, as I do on this show. Opened up with Murray Porter and Res Blues. We'll go out with a Murray Porter tune as well. By the way, as I said, this Saturday is the Native American Music Awards back here in Seneca territory, a sold out event, and Murray Porter, my good friend Murray Porter, who you guys are so familiar with listening to on my show, is up for a couple of awards, and I wish him the best for that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But again, going forward, I'm not sure what's going to transpire. Look, if WBAI never returns to having a studio and producing local programming, I'm not sure where my future could go with that. The only way I could see me participating in that is if I can find another partner in the New York City area that would still have me going to New York, doing a show in New York, reaching directly out to New York audiences, and whether however this WBI thing plays out, I would love to know that I could continue to be aired on WBAI, but I can't support what has currently occurred. And look, WBAI has been off the air, for 3 weeks. It'll be at least a month that they will have been off the air before a final determination gets made in the courts. Now, as I alluded to earlier, there still is a question about the internal governance, and regardless of what the courts do, there is the Pacifica board that should be able to assert control. Thus far, the same people who were responsible for the shutdown have tried to undermine the ability for the Pacifica National Board to come together. They've cast votes, and they said that those votes don't count because I don't know exactly why, but there's been some argument whether a quorum has been met. But two things that I think are important to mention. And look, if there's one thing about WBAI that I find disturbing is the fact that it is struggling financially, so much so that they are over 40% of the time they're in a fund drive mode. Well, in that first week of October, we were in a fund drive, and the plug was pulled after almost, it was about a week into a fund drive. So the idea of trying to pull money in to make the very payroll that some of these folks at Pacifica said we weren't making was completely undermined by pulling this stunt in the middle of at the very beginning of a fund drive. Now, the other thing that was happening, and this hasn't been widely talked about, is there's an election system that goes on for the local station boards, which affect obviously the Pacifica National boards, and that election finished. I mean, the term for casting votes completed during the shutdown. So the idea of having a station shut down while you're reaching out to, especially to the listener members who you're asking them to vote, and of course the staff members who, so both the staff don't know if they're staff anymore, and the listeners don't know if they have their station back. So the idea of doing this, the timing could not have been worse for a number of reasons, not the least of which are both the fundraising and the elections that were taking place across the Pacifica networks, and I think that also raises some significant questions. So, look, I think it's important that people realize that there are producers who want to return to the air, and they cannot. And they cannot for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that we don't have a functioning studio, for one thing, or a functioning studio with access to the transmitter. Now, the other thing that is really unfortunate, there has been an effort to rebuild or to build out and renovate a space which was really going to finally give us what I would consider a real studio. One of the things that disturbed me immensely about doing my program at WBAI was the fact that we weren't in a soundproof area. There was oftentimes a lot of noise that was generated in the hallway. WBAI was in the process of building out a studio that essentially we have never been able to use. Yeah, and it was really in the final stages of completion. So, and of course, when the so-called coup took place, some of that got dismantled. So, the idea that for at least 6 months, there's been an effort to build out a real studio at 388 Atlantic Avenue. It's really sad that in the final leg of run of getting that studio built out, a few individuals made the decision to pull the plug and essentially render this studio that a significant amount of money is put into as well. Again, when you want to talk about fiscal responsibility, the idea of not only shutting down the studio but telling the owner of the building that the space was no longer required, when a significant investment has been put in not only in equipment but in actual renovation to a space, including soundproofing windows and that kind of stuff. And look, we were all looking forward to this. We were all looking forward to this. To building out a studio that, and having better video capability, and having a better look. Look, I come into WBAI each week and throw a banner up on the wall to give it somewhat of a look. I bring my own camera equipment in. I can't haul in lighting, but we were going to finally have a space that had adequate lighting that was going to provide us with again with a much better look to not only do radio, but to do some of what I do here with streaming and the like. So, and again, I think that contributes to another timing issue that just seems all wrong. And so again, I don't know what the future holds. I'm going to try to continue to do to reach out to those of you at least who listen on via the internet, via Facebook and podcasts and that kind of stuff. Try to stay relevant with you folks. And I'm hoping to get to a place where I can at least take in some calls, at some level. But in the meantime, looking to do whatever I can do to get back to New York City. Hopefully back on the air, broadcasting from a WBAI studio. But unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of control over that. So we're going to see what plays out. And but I will say that regardless of what happens, you will see Reggie Johnson and John Kane together. You will see Michael G. Haskins and John Kane together. These are relationships that have been forged over the years, and I can say with a fair amount of confidence that that the work that we've done together over the years, at some level, will continue. Hopefully with WBAI, but if not, through just trying to do some collaborative efforts on some events going forward. So. Look, only doing about a half-hour show here, but on this week, I will try to return back, and I got some rearranging to do, and some timing issues and schedule issues to sort out to be able to do a 1 hour show or more. I mean, how great would it be for me to, take back, the hour that I lost due to some management decisions and do a 2 hour show. It would only make sense if I could do a 2 hour show and still take calls. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I wanted to, again, stay in touch, stay in communication with those of you who have begun or who've become listeners of the show, especially through social media, and hopefully we can do more. And of course, I also can't share a microphone with Shawnee Rice if I'm doing it from here. So not sure what we'll be able to patch together, but working on a couple of different scenarios. I don't want to get any false hopes up or to make any solid predictions, but we will do something, and we will do what we can to get back into New York City to do this show. In the meantime, I'll do what I can to do it from here. So I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank you for continuing to support this program. And we may do some fundraising events to try to create whether it's lifting WBAI back up from the ashes, or whether it's trying to create some other capability. So stay tuned. I will be doing events. I may even try to pull off doing an event in the month of November. I did say it was Halloween, right? Not a big deal to me. There's enough to be spooked over with the current state of affairs in general. But again, I want to thank you for listening, and we'll be back doing this next week. And of course, you can always join me on Tuesdays and Saturdays, although it's this Sunday this week, to listen to my other show, which is a little bit more centric to native issues. But I welcome you all to join me there. Subscribe to my podcast. You can catch my podcast by searching or asking Alexa to play Let's Talk Native with John Kane podcasts. That's the best way to find them, and you'll find the shows that I do, my Let's Talk Native shows, as well as my Let's Talk shows. And I do encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. We will continue to do videos of the shows that we do here, as well as producing short form videos. And look, I'm going to work with my good buddy and partner back here, Jake Proud, to perhaps even venture into something a little bit more long form in terms of producing a video. So we've got some ideas, and we do plan to make them reality. So hang with us through the podcast, Let's Talk Native podcast, and through subscribing to our YouTube channel, Let's Talk Native TV. This is John Kane. Look, as always, I want to thank you for staying with me, and we'll continue on, I guess.